Hi everyone. In today's video, we're going to go over three distinct things. The first of which is how to have repeating item information fed into a PDF form like this, where you have child 1, child 2, child three's information, let's say their name and their date of birth. So I'm going to show you how to take this information, whatever's input here, and have that fed into this document like this for repeating items. The second thing that we're going to go over is how to create invisible logic around the number of that repeating item appears within the workflow, and then attaching logic to that particular amount of repeating items here in the invisible logic section, such as if the number of children is greater than 0, then any children equals yes. The third piece of information we're going to go over today is how to then take this logic and this variable that we created and attach that to conditional document outputs. For example, if we only want this document to show if any children is yes, so if there are any children that were entered. So we're going to build this out together, and I'm going to show you how I was able to tag this document to each of the questions, how I created this invisible logic and these new variables and attached logic to those new variables, as well as how I was able to create conditional document outputs using that new variable that we created with invisible logic. So let's do this together by going over to our dashboards. We're going to create a new workflow and we're going to call it, let's say, for example, repeating item test with PDF create. Now, the first thing we want to do is take a look at our output document that we're trying to fill and understand which information needs to go where so that we can create our workflows based on this information. So in our case, we want children's information and we want to know the children's, in this case, their full name and their date of birth for each of these children, just for the first three children. So there can be more, there can be less, but we just want the first three children's information. So let's go ahead and create a repeating item here. And obviously this is just an isolated example. So this would be within a broader, larger workflow. But in our case, we just want to create, let's say, children. And let's go over here to add a question, and we're going to choose repeating item. For this one, we can call this children as well. And we can give the question title, child's full name, and we can give it a variable name of child full name, for example, and we want this to be a text question and we want it to be required. Let's add another one, and this one's going to be child's date of birth. Then we can say child date of birth. And we want this one to be a date question like this, and we want that to be required, and there's no logic attached to this one because we want both of these questions to appear in all cases. Now, the other thing we can take note of is that not all people have children. So we can go into our settings, we can ask an initial question, and we can have the initial question be, do you have any children? That way the person can say yes or no. We can also choose to collect the items on a single page. So for example, like this, where it would add another here, or we can make it to where there's a continuation question, such as when the person fills out this one, they go continue, and then they're asked, are there any more children? And then you can say yes or no. I think it's easier in this case to just say add another if they wanted to add more. So let's just keep that on a single page. We can also have minimum number of items or maximum number of items, but in this case, we're just going to leave both of those blank. The other thing I'm quickly going to do before we run this and save and test it is I'm going to go over to my settings. I'm going to go over to customize messages, and I'm just going to say thank you for now because in both cases, this message will be fine. So if we have the output document or if we don't, it will just say thank you at the end. So right now we don't have any output documents attached to this, but we're just going to say save and we're going to run this just so we can see that everything's working correctly. So right now we have this initial question, do you have any children? If we say yes, then their person's going to be able to input some information about their children. They can add another, all on the same page pretty easily. Because they continue, they can see which ones they've entered, they can add more, or they can continue into the review page and go to the end. Now we see that thank you message that we customized, and there aren't any documents because we haven't created any to be attached here yet. So the next step would be to take our PDF that we've either created ourselves or that we obtained from whatever we're trying to automate here. And we need to attach that now to our workflow. Now, just remember that if you have a PDF that needs to be unlocked first, then you can do that here and just drop this into here. Say that you promise that you have the right to unlock it. Then you go here. You would be able to see what the variables are that the person created. You can give a suggested name, the last entered name, or the original PDF field names, and so on. And then you'd finish and download, and that would be that unlocked version. In my case, mine's already unlocked, so I'm just going to say choose file, and I'm going to choose my file here and say open. I can go into the back end of this particular document by clicking on it, and I can give it a new name here. Let's just do children information, and then I can see the variables that are on the back end of this particular document: child 1 name, child 1 date of birth, child 2 name, child 2 date of birth, child 3 name, and child 3 date of birth. So in order to tag each of these sections to the questions that we created here and to the repeating items for each one, I'm going to go into this section here and I'm going to say tag to question. So note that you can tag to a question, you leave it untagged, or you can enter text. So let's go tag to question. Then I'm going to choose from children. You can see that children is the repeating item name. And then we have the sub items, which are child full name and child date of birth. So in this case, I want this section to have children, child full name, and then I want to choose which child. So which repeating item in which position. So in this case, this would be child one's name. And then I also want to tag this next one to the child's date of birth for the one in the first position. Then for child 2 name, I want to tag this to a question, which is child full name, but now the one that's in the second position. Child 2 date of birth, same thing here, child date of birth for the one in the second position. For child 3 name, I want to tag this to a question and I want it to be the child's full name that's in the third position. Same thing here, we'll tag it to a question where the child's date of birth is in the third position. So that's how you're easily able to tag a repeating item to a fillable PDF using this tagger here. So let's go ahead and save this, and we're going to just run it to make sure it's functioning properly before I rebuild out anything else. So when we run this, we would expect to see our initial question: do you have any children? If we say no, we'll go to this kind of review page, and then we'll see in children information that nothing is filled out because we didn't enter any information, but we still see this PDF. That's fine for now. We're going to fix it later. So now we're going to run this again, and we're going to say, do you have any children? Now this time we're going to say yes. So we're going to put in some information. We're going to put in somebody's date of birth. We're just going to choose, let's just do 2, for example, and see how we go. And then let's just choose whichever one here, or say continue, continue, and go to the last page here, where now we're going to see the children's information is entered for the first 2 children. Sally, who was born on this day, and this day and date. We have child 2, which is Asher Joseph, and the date that that child was born as well. And child 3 is blank because we didn't enter a third child. So let's say that in our case, we only want this output document to show to the end user if they've said that they have children. In any other case, we don't want this to show. Now, the way that we would do this is we would go to output documents normally, and we would say create conditional document outputs. However, notice that if we only had these 3 variables, we don't have any options show up here to attach any logic to. So right now, this will be the default document that shows in any case. But we only want this document to show if the person has indicated that they have children or that the repeating items for children is greater than 0. So we can accomplish this by creating some new variables using invisible logic and then attaching some conditions around those variables. So let's go ahead and do that now. So what we need to do is go back to our questions tab. We need to create a new page. Invisible logic needs its own page. We're going to say add question, and we're going to go down to invisible logic. For this part, We can just call this, I like to say invisible logic so I can see on my sidebar where my invisible logic is if I want to revert to it quickly. And then I can just do something like any children. So what we're going to do is we're going to create two variables. The first of which is going to be a number variable. That's going to be number of children. And we're going to come over here to where it says add value, and this is going to equal the value of the number of children. So children.number, that's already by default here because we have created that here, and it's just going to ask us to see which one we want, and then we just need to say add. So now whenever we say number of children, this is going to output the number of children. Now what we're trying to do in this scenario is we want the output document to only show if the number of children is greater than 0. So we need to have one more variable that we create here that we can attach some logic to. Now you can see now that we go to create conditional document outputs, if we check this now, we can see number of children, the variable that we created, but it's going to ask us for a value. So we could say if number of children is 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or so on, but it's not really going to give us the flexibility that we're kind of looking for here, which is if it's greater than 0. But we can get around this by going over back to our questions tab, going back into our invisible logic page, and adding another variable that's going to be a yes, no. That is going to be any children. So we're not going to put anything here because we're going to attach some logic now. So this is going to go under added visible logic, and we're going to say if number of children is greater than the number 0, add, then any children is yes. Otherwise, or else, any children is no. So what we're basically saying is that we want the variable any children to be yes if the number of children in our repeating item question is greater than 0, meaning that there's 1 or more. We also want any children to be no if it's not greater than 0. So we only want to show the document if there are any children. So the next step we need to do is actually attach this variable now to the output document. So now when we say create additional document outputs, create conditional output documents, then we can say if any children is yes, then output this document. That way, if the person does not have any children or hasn't indicated in this particular workflow that they have any, then they're not going to see this particular output document. So let's go ahead and save this now, and let's run it. So now if the person says no to do you have any children and they continue, they should not see an output document because we've indicated that we only want this document to show if they've indicated that they have children. Now, if we run it again and we say yes, and we put in some information about each of these children, let's say we have 2 or 3 children that we're going to put in information for. Let's just choose some random dates and names here. And we continue now and continue to the end. Then we're going to see this PDF here, children information, which will have the information that we entered for each of these 3 children. So to recap what we've just gone over, we have talked about how we can create a repeating item that can then have the information that's entered fed into a fillable PDF by using the PDF tagger here within Gavel itself, where we can go into this document and tag this to a question that we've created, which is the repeating item, and we can choose the position that we want to show within each of these sections. We've also learned how to create new variables using invisible logic that makes it to where we can see the number and interact with the number of children here. And we've also created a variable that we attached logic to called any children that made it to where any children is yes if the number of children is greater than 0. and we've made it to where if it's not greater than 0, then any children is no. And we've done that so that we could attach conditional document output logic to say only show this output document if any children is yes. Otherwise, don't show this document because the person has indicated that they don't have any children. On output, for when someone does have children, they're going to see this end document with their children's information, where the first 3 children are shown here like this, with their full name and their date of birth in each section. So that's all for this video, and I will see you in the next one.